say that when I'm taking a discussion over these MCQs, my main aim is that I would like you all to know facts and highlights about few topics. So I would request one and all to have your pen and paper along with your MCQ sheets so that you all can write down what is important. Not everything can be incorporated in our MCQ question papers. That's the reason why in my discussion, I try to sum up what exactly we are looking at when we are reading a particular topic, what we should actually know, numerics, few facts. So I would request you all to have your pen and paper ready so that whenever I say that please write this down, this is for you all to note, and please keep filing these notes. My discussion will be purely related to what you all should be knowing when it comes to conservative dentistry as well as its dental materials. So few questions we will discuss in details, few questions which are direct from textbook. We may not really speak a lot over it, we will just discuss the answer and go ahead with the ones which are more important or which are ones to be a little more understood. So shall we begin now? All right. Placement of sealants into pit and fissure areas is better if. So the answer is yes, when the sealant is applied at one edge and allowed to flow to the other edge. Okay, now sealants has been a very interesting topic in the last 2 years. They've been asking some of the other question about sealants. So you should know whenever they are talking about sealant, it is going to be either three things in relation to it. One, the most important criteria for the placement of sealant, that is adequate retention. Okay, so that is first point to be remembered. Most important criteria for the placement of sealant is its adequate retention. Or if the question says that when a sealant is applied to the occlusal pit and fissures, what becomes most crucial? So the most crucial fact is that there should be mechanical retention between the sealant and the etched enamel. Okay, so adequate retention or mechanical retention between the sealant and the etched enamel. These are two important things. Whenever they ask you about sealant, this has to be in your mind. Then sealant should always be applied from one edge, that is one edge near the proximal marginal ridge, and it should be allowed to flow. This is done why? So that you prevent any entrapment of air. So the flow of sealant should be in such a manner that it is applied on one edge and it is allowed to flow on the other side. If it is directly painted on the occlusal surface, there will be a high chance that there will be entrapment of air. And the fourth point to remember about this is that the or you can say the most important property for a sealant is to have a low viscosity, so that you ensure that there is good flow with these materials. So low viscosity, adequate retention, mechanical retention of the sealant with the between the sealant and the etched enamel are the most important factors to be looked at. I hope you all have written all these things down. Have you all written? All right, good. Next question. One of the reasons for the lighter and less chromatic color of the restoration over time is? The answer? Whenever I read a question, please post your answer. If you are online, it will just ensure that it will let me know on what lines do you all think when you read a particular question. So if possible, once I read a question, please post your answers. Yes. Yes, so the answer is extremely rough surface by the restoration. That is when a restoration ages in mouth because of the abrasion of the filler particles, there is an increase in the surface area of the restoration, and as a result of that, there is more light reflection because of the loss of filler particles over a period of time on a particular restoration due to abrasion, chewing forces, mastication. There is loss of filler particles, there is going to be an increase in the surface area, and as a result of that, there is more light reflection. As a result, you see the restoration appears all the more whiter because there is a greater surface area for the light to get reflected. So extremely rough surface by restoration is the answer. Difference in potential between dissimilar fillings in opposing or adjacent teeth may cause dissimilar fillings in the mouth. Causes what mechanism? Yes, galvanism. There can be another way in which they can put this question, or in fact the most common way of asking this question in the papers is that in a recently restored tooth, the patient experiences sharp pain on chewing or biting. So it's generally because of galvanism. So when you have two dissimilar fillings, in here we are talking about a Karsgold restoration and amalgam restoration. So Karsgold, it acts as a cathode. Okay, Karsgold, it acts as a cathode because it has positive electromotive potential, and amalgam, it will act as an anode because it has a negative electromotive potential. So cathode, that is Karsgold, acting as a positive electrode, and anode, which is the negative electrode. The anode is the one which will face loss of electrons. So in this case, amalgam is the one which will be deteriorating. Amalgam is the one in which there will be deterioration because it is acting as an anode. It is the one which will corrode. Okay, and this corrosion products, what are the corrosion products? The tin oxychlorides, the tin oxides. These corrosion products along with mercury that is liberated, that gets deposited on the cathode. In this case, it becomes the cast restoration. So that is why in a clinical picture what you will see is that amalgam is undergoing corrosion and your Karsgold is undergoing discoloration of a tarnished film. That's because of the cathode and the anode reaction. This process is called as galvanism, and what the patient experiences is a sharp pain on chewing or when the restorations come in contact with each other, that is even at rest. Okay, so that is galvanism. No, in a recent fillings, if the pain is in a recent restoration, see, that is a different question that is asked. That is, if in a recently paced restoration, a patient is experiencing pain. Okay, they are not saying anything like sharp pain, or they are not saying anything in relation to dissimilar fillings. So that is a different question which they will ask. So in that case, there will be hypoocclusion. There is going to be sensitivity in the tooth. That is a different set of question only, which you have the query. In a recent filling, if the patient is feeling pain on chewing, okay, this is the question. In a recently restored tooth, patient is experiencing pain, or patient is experiencing sensitivity. That is because of high points or hyperocclusion. Okay, that is a different question. But if they say that there are dissimilar fillings, or if the patient is experiencing sharp pain, okay, that is a different concept. You have to look for those words. What are they hinting at? Alright, so we go to the next question. In vitro testing of crown and bridge alloys to study tarnish involves immersing in solutions containing all of the following except. It's a very textual question. One of these is not used for experimentation with tarnish properties. The answer to the fourth question, the answer is B, that is carbonates. Now please remember, whenever a question is related to tarnish, that is the solution that is used for the tarnish experiment, sulfides are used when you are testing an alloy which is of a noble metal. Okay, and chlorides and phosphates are used for testing an alloy for its tarnish property when it is a base metal. Okay, it's only the carbonates that are not used in your in vitro testing. So sulfides are used when you have a noble metal to be tested, and chlorides and phosphates, more so the chlorides to be more specific. Chlorides are used for your base metal testing. So if the question says that solution containing what is used for testing of your noble alloys tarnishing, that is sulfides. Chlorides and phosphates are for the base metal. Have you all written this down? Okay. Next question. The test most important for finding out the longevity and use of endodontic files and reamers is? The answer to the fifth question. Yes, the answer is torsional strength. You have to remember two things. Endodontic files, when they fail, it can be either due to two causes. One is because of cyclic fatigue, or one it may be because of torsional fatigue. Okay. Cyclic fatigue happens is when you have a file being used in a curved canal. So you'll have zones of compression on one side, zones of tension being formed on one side. Okay, and that is how, because of compression and tension simultaneously acting on a file in a curved canal, a file undergoes cyclic fatigue. But the most common mode of failure in an endodontic situation is when the file, particularly the last 3 millimeter segment of a file, gets binded in the canal. So when a file is entering the canal in rotation and it gets binded at a certain point, especially the last 3 millimeters of segment. So what happens is that it is locked in that segment and the upper part of the file continues to rotate. That is actually torque. This is what you call torque. Torque is what, when you hold a file at one end rigidly fixed and you try to rotate the upper part of a file in a clockwise or an anti-clockwise direction. That is how you apply a torque. So that is the most common mode of failure. That is, the file is undergoing torsional fatigue. So the most important test is that how much is the torsional strength of a file. That is, that if you lock the 3 millimeters of a file segment, okay, in a testing machine, and you try to rotate the upper handle of your file, how much stress, how much torsional stress can it take before failing or before breaking? So that is your torsional fatigue, or the measure of your torsional strength. So torsional strength of a file is the most important property of an endodontic instrument. Okay, so the answer is torsional strength. We go on to the next question. Corrosion which occurs in the gingival seat area of a class 2 amalgam restoration is most often failures. Okay, you all have, somebody has a query about two types of fatigue. One is torsional fatigue, the other one is cyclic fatigue. Cyclic fatigue is less relevant when you're testing the property of an endodontic file. Cyclic fatigue, because it happens in a clinical situation where you have a curvature in the canal. So when you're using a file which is rigid in a curved canal, there will be zones of compression and tension. And due to this dual stresses, the file may fail in a curved canal. But this is of less clinical relevance as much as a torsional failure of a file which gets binded in a canal when it is still in a rotation. So in that situation, the file fails when it gets locked in a canal. Coming back to the sixth question, answer is crevice corrosion. So here you all need to know two types of corrosion. One is a dry corrosion or chemical corrosion, and the second one is electrochemical corrosion or a wet corrosion. Okay, dry or a chemical corrosion, and the second broader category is wet or electrochemical corrosion. So when does dry corrosion happen? Dry corrosion happens in absence of an electrolyte, that is maybe saliva or the oral fluids. So dry corrosion or chemical corrosion is basically a form of a tarnish. So where does this tarnish is generally seen? It will be seen in gold alloys which have silver component in them. Okay, gold alloys having silver. There you will see that they will undergo dry corrosion. Or also the silver eutectic alloys in the high copper amalgams, they also can undergo dry corrosion. So silver, copper, eutectic alloys which are a component of high copper amalgams or gold silver containing alloys, they undergo tarnishing. So that is dry corrosion which happens in absence of electrolyte. The second broader category or the more important or the more clinically relevant category is the electrochemical corrosion or the wet corrosion. So by the name itself, it is happening in presence of an electrolyte, that is saliva. Now this again has a lot of subcategories. उसमें तुम लोग लिखो electrochemical में first galvanism, second लिखो stress corrosion, third concentration cell corrosion. It is also called as pitting corrosion. Fourth, crevice corrosion. So how many types of corrosions? How many types of electrochemical corrosion? 4. Galvanism, stress corrosion, then concentration, cell corrosion or pitting corrosion, and lastly the crevice corrosion. So इसके examples आप लोग लिख लो, because anyone can be asked in the exam. Galvanism we've already mentioned. It's when you have dissimilar metals in the mouth. Stress corrosion, it is seen when you have, it is typically seen when, if in a restoration, you have some regions which are more deformed and some regions which are less deformed. Like suppose if you have restored a class 2 amalgam, okay, in the areas where it is contacting the opposing tooth, that is in the central fossa area, around the marginal ridge area. So those areas of a restoration that are undergoing more deformation, okay, they will act as anode. And those that are not undergoing any deformation, that is the proximal surface, you know, along the cuspal inclines, they are not undergoing deformation to a lesser extent. So they act as cathode. So again you have that electrolytic cycle beginning between the anode and the cathode, and that is the example of stress corrosion. So if the question says that in a clinical situation, if a restoration has more deformed area and lesser deformed area, then what type of corrosion that will happen? So that is a stress corrosion. Another example of stress corrosion is when you use a rubber dam clamp to place a rubber dam sheet along the tooth. So those clamps, when you keep stressing them while opening and closing its jaws, so those prongs will undergo certain degree of stress because they keep getting deformed every time you open and you close it. to put it across the tooth. So that is itself an example of stress corrosion. So the opening and closure act of even a rubber dam clamp while placing a rubber dam sheet, that itself leads to stress corrosion. Then the concentration cell corrosion or pitting corrosion, that happens when you have restored a tooth, or in fact even without a restoration, when you have a tooth which has pits and fissures, okay, or restoration which has pits, which has some porosities, okay, or rough surfaces. Those surfaces of the restoration or the tooth, if it gets covered by the food debris, then that itself will cause oxidation reduction reaction. That means those areas that are under the food debris will act as anode, and those areas which are otherwise being cleansed will act as cathode, and that itself will result in formation of an electrolytic reaction, and it will undergo concentration cell corrosion or a pitting corrosion. So concentration cell corrosion or a pitting corrosion is when you have any area of the tooth surface or pits and fissures of a restoration or of a tooth, when they get covered with food debris, okay, that area will undergo concentration or a pitting corrosion. And lastly, crevice corrosion itself is a subtype of your concentration cell corrosion. That is generally seen in the interproximal area or in the area or in the margin of a restoration along with the tooth structure. So in the interproximal areas or at the margins of a restoration with the tooth structure, where again you have insufficient cleansing or packing of the food debris, those areas, the interproximal areas or the margins of the restoration along the tooth surface will undergo crevice type of a corrosion, because the base of that crevice will act as an anode and the top part of the restoration or the top part of that crevice will act as a cathode. Okay, so that is a form of a crevice corrosion. So have you all written all these 4 types of corrosion? In the exam, one of these with an example will be asked. So whether it is with a rubber dam clamp, whether it is deformed, undeformed area, whether it is dissimilar metals, you have to know very exactly or very precisely what type of corrosion are we dealing with. We go to the next question. Better shade matching can be achieved if the shade guide tabs are arranged by. So the answer is crevice corrosion. Just write down that it is at the interproximal junction, that is between the restoration and the tooth, or at the margin of a restoration besides the tooth. That crevice which is present at the margins, within that crevice itself, the bottommost part of the crevice will act as a cathode and the top part will act, the bottommost. I will come to what is penetrating corrosion. I will come to it when it is more appropriate to discuss about penetrating corrosion. Okay. For now, just write whatever crevice corrosion I have said. Crevice corrosion is when in the interproximal area or at the margin of a restorations, you have the bottommost part of the crevice acting as an anode and the top part acting as a cathode. That itself will result in formation of electrolytic cycle and you have crevice corrosion. Okay, the 7th question is, yes, it is in the decreasing order of value. So decreasing orders, that is from highest value is your light colors and the darkest or the lowest value is your darker side, the black side. So your shades are always placed in from the lighter to the darker shades. In this relation, you have to know 2 things. Very commonly asked question for shade matching, that how much time should you take for shade matching? That is 20 seconds. So 20 seconds is the time that should be required for shade matching. This is from Vimal Sikri. Second most commonly asked question is that while shade matching, if you squint one eye, that is if you make one eye smaller, so what are you actually trying to, which phase or which aspect of color are you trying to figure out? That is the value again. Okay, so squint test while shade matching is to determine the correct value. Shade tabs are always arranged from lighter shades to the darker shades. Okay, and 20 seconds is the time that is required for the shade matching. So these are the three things that they most commonly ask for shade matching questions. Clinical failure of rubber dam clamps may fail as a result of this. We have already discussed. Three things I said about shade matching. 20 seconds. Shade tabs are always arranged from decreasing order of value, that is from the lighter shades to the darker shades. And the third one was the squint test. The squint test is used to determine the correct value of a shade. Yes, that is stress corrosion for the clinical failure of rubber dams. Protection against corrosion can be done by all except the answer to the 9th question. The answer to the 9th question is D, that is gold coating on the surface. This is again a question picked up from Skinner Phillips from the chapter of physical properties. You can apply a non-conductive film, you can apply thin surface oxides, you can do an electroplating. These all will be able to protect a restoration against corrosion. The only option that is gold coating on the surface, whenever a gold coating on the surface is applied, the only drawback is that it may get peeled off because gold is a soft, it's the most ductile and malleable. We all know gold among all the alloys is the most ductile and malleable metal. So it can get easily scratched, it can get peeled off, it may become an incomplete film during its coating. So due to all of these reasons, most importantly being a soft, ductile, malleable material, it is the one. See, electroplating is, how do you electroplate? It's actually a proper a cell which is created in which you, with the help of a current, you ensure that there is deposition of electrons from the anode to the cathode. So it is a more better option over gold coating over the surface. Electroplating, no. According to what Skinner Phillips says, electroplating, yes, is an option for protection against corrosion. In fact, even when you want to take impressions and you want to pour them in a suitable material, like suppose if you are taking an elastomeric impression and you want to pour them in a gypsum product, okay, so at that point of time also you ensure that you are electroplating with a material that will be compatible with your gypsum, with your dental plaster, dental stone. So electroplating is a better or a more stable option than gold coating on the surface. Gold coating, as I simply said, that it is a very soft material, it gets easily scratched or peeled off. Not any coating which is electroplated will be as softer or as easily scratchable as compared to gold. So yes, the answer is gold coating on the surface. Alright, so we go on the 10th question. Why not A and B option? That is because it remains more stable. A non-conducting film or formation of surface oxides. These oxides, which are basically these metallic oxides of iron and platinum, palladium, they are more stable. They don't get scratched off. So that is the reason why it is a more, see, there has to be a certain method of causing some kind of protection against these corrosion. So they are more stable option, and that's how the Skinner-Phillips describes that there are these 5 methods in which you can ensure that there is lesser corrosion of your restorations, as opposed to only this particular option, that is gold coating, which cannot be used. Okay. Go through I would just suggest that go through the last page of the physical properties of dental material. Skinner-Phillips, your physical properties of dental material, it has a very good paragraph on the protection against corrosion. Please read that. It will help you and enable you to remember which are the things which you can actually pick. Oil-based cements are primarily used for luting your provisional crowns. Okay. So provisional. So what are these oil-based cements? Here they are basically talking about your zinc oxide eugenol-based cements. Rest for the metal crowns, for your PFM crowns, for your all ceramic crowns, you can use your water-based cements. What are water-based cements? You can use GIC, you can use zinc phosphate. Then you have resin-based cements, that is resin cement itself, self-cure or light cure. You can resin modified GICs, you can use compomers. Okay, so metal crowns, PFM crowns, metal crowns and your PFM crowns, for that you use water-based cements. That is your GIC or zinc phosphate. For provisional crowns, I hope you all are writing this down. Metal crowns, PFM crowns, you use your water-based cements, that is your GIC or zinc phosphate. Provisional crowns, you use oil-based cements, that is ZOE-based cements. And all ceramic crowns, again, depending upon what type of ceramic, you can either use conventional GIC, okay, or you can use your self-cure, light-cure GIC. Self-cure, light-cure, resin cement. The only thing again which they generally ask you a question, that is all ceramic crowns, everything can be used except. So that except is resin modified GIC. RMGI can never be used for all ceramic crowns because it has less elastic modulus. It can undergo more deformation, or it undergoes more plastic deformation. So your all ceramic crown will crack. Okay, please remember this. All ceramic crowns, you can use your water-based cements, that is your conventional luting GIC, especially when it is a zirconia, or you can use your self-cure or light-cure resin cement. The punch here is that you can never use a resin modified GIC for the cementation of an all ceramic crown, and that is how most likely a question is asked, that all can be used except for the cementation of all ceramic, and that is RMGI. RMGI has lesser elastic modulus, it can undergo more plastic deformation as compared to your conventional GICs, and that is the reason why it is not used for cementation of all ceramic. I hope this question is clear and you've written about RMGI. We go to the next question. Dimensional change in amalgam is initial contraction and then expansion. Okay, in this, now most commonly they've been asking these questions that modern amalgams undergo what? So you just have to know, see this is a very, this is how an amalgam sets, that when you start mixing amalgam particles, alloy particle, amalgam alloy powder with mercury, because the powder starts dissolving into mercury, there's going to be an initial contraction. That initial contraction is for about 20 minutes. Okay, so initial contraction for 20 minutes. As you further continue to mix the alloy powder with the mercury, there is the formation of your gamma 1, gamma 2 crystals. Okay, so once these crystals, the gamma 1 and gamma 2 starts being formed, these crystals start, the crystals with their axes, they start pushing each other. They're pushing each other, the crystal blades, as they push each other, there is going to be an expansion. Okay, once your gamma 1, gamma 2 crystals start getting formed, there is continued expansion until the entire matrix is set. Once this matrix is set, then there is going to be further continued reaction where in the interstices. So you're understanding, first when you start mixing the alloy powder with mercury, there is dissolution of the alloy powder by the mercury. So there is net, or there is initial contraction. This contraction will last till 20 minutes until all the alloy powder is dissolved. Once it's dissolved, then you have the formation of your matrix, that is your gamma 1 and gamma 2. Once these crystals start being formed, they impinge on each other and there is an outward thrust. This outward thrust will result into expansion. Then once the matrix sets into a rigid form, then there is continued reaction within the interstices. So it will result in the, again, continued expansion. Now this interstices expansion will depend only when if you have sufficient mercury. If you do not have mercury, then the reaction stops there. So if the question says that modern amalgam alloy, they undergo what? So the answer would be net contraction for 3 reasons. 1, because modern amalgam alloy, they are mixed at a lesser mercury alloy ratio. You have less mercury in the composition. There is only 42 to 45% of mercury. So modern amalgam alloys undergo net contraction because of less mercury, that is 42 to 45%. Then second thing is that you use amalgamators. These amalgamators ensure that there is increase in speed while you're mixing. Okay, there is increase in trituration energy, as a result of which the entire reaction is very fast, due to which again there is net contraction. So second reason is that you use high speed amalgamators. Because of this high speed amalgamators, I'm again repeating, these amalgamators, they cause a faster consumption of mercury, there is increased speed, there is increased trituration energy. So because of faster consumption of mercury, there is again net contraction. Third reason, because these modern amalgam alloys, they are generally, we are talking about the spherical alloys, because they are smaller particle in size, they have a higher surface area and there is faster consumption of mercury. So again, because fast consumption of mercury is happening, again there is net contraction. And lastly, because of increased condensation pressure. So 4 points you have to remember about modern amalgam alloys. They may ask you in any which way these things. First point, that modern amalgam alloys, they are mixed at a lesser mercury alloy ratio. That is, there is only 40 to 45% of mercury in the composition. Second, you use high speed amalgamators. So what does high speed amalgamators do? There is increase in speed, there is increase in trituration energy, the particles get broken down faster, mercury gets consumed faster, and as a result there is net contraction. Third, that because of the smaller particle size as opposed to the late cut which was used in the older alloys, because of the smaller particle size, there is an increase in the surface area, again the mercury gets consumed faster, so there is net contraction. And lastly, because you have higher condensation pressures that are applied while condensing this, so it causes more packing and squeezing of the mercury outside. So that results again in net contraction. Okay. So that is about the modern amalgam alloys. In a broader term, the dimensional change in amalgam is always an initial contraction for the first 20 minutes and there is then net expansion. Am I clear with the 4 points? of modern amalgam alloys, because it has been very commonly asked. There was also a question which says that when you increase the trituration time or when you increase the speed, what gets affected? So that is the working time or the setting time of an amalgam. You have to think on those lines. If this entire description which I gave you all about the modern amalgam alloys, if I have to put it in this way, that if I am increasing the speed or if I am increasing the trituration time, what is getting affected? Definitely the speed, the working time and the setting time is getting affected. Saliva provides some protection of dental amalgam from corrosion. Yes, that is increased condensation pressure. The fourth point was increased condensation pressure. When you are applying your increments of amalgam with a greater condensation force, it will squeeze the mercury. Even the excess mercury that may remain behind by chance, that itself will get squeezed out. So that itself will result in net contraction. That was the fourth point. The answer to the 12th question, saliva protecting dental amalgam from corrosion, is through. We all know that there are phosphate buffers in saliva. So the protection that is provided by the saliva is through its phosphate buffers. What absorption of composites with hybrid particle is what than that of composites with microfine particles? We are now discussing the 13th question, that is what absorption of hybrid composites is dash as opposed to composites which are microfilled. So it is lower. See, in the book, in Skinner Phillips, you have a very big table. But for you to know, you just have to know three things. Okay, what is the filler content of three major groups? The filler content of microfilled, the filler content of macrofilled or traditional, and the filler content of hybrid. Okay. So over there only where the question is, see, your ranges and everything is definitely there in textbook, but for you to just remember, there are three figures or there are three numerics which you just have to remember: 30, 50, 70. So what is this 30, 50, 70? 30 volume percent for microfilled, 50 volume percent for macro or traditional, and 70 for hybrid. Okay. और जहाँ पे तुमने 30, 50, 70 लिखा है, उसके साइड में ही लिखो 50, 70 and 85. 50, 70 and 85, that is weight percent. So अगर weight percent में पूछ रहे हैं, so that is 50 for microfilled, 70 for macrofilled and 85 for hybrid. See, these figures which I have given to you is it's not something which is directly which is from the book. It is always in the books they mention ranges. Okay. But for you to remember, not all numerics you will be able to remember at that particular given moment. Okay. But you just have to, why I have written this is so that you can, at a glance, you remember, okay, the numbers are 30, 50, 70 in volume percent, or the numbers are 50, 70, 85 in weight percent. So whenever such questions are asked, like what absorption is higher or lower, or polymerization shrinkage is higher or lower, so accordingly you just quickly think, okay, what was the percentage of filler? More the percentage of filler, better will be the properties. Its mechanical properties, its water absorption would be less, its polymerization shrinkage will be less. So this figure is not for you to know the exact volume or weight percent. These figures which I have given you is just for you at a glance to remember that whenever a question is asked in relation to its properties like water absorption, polymerization shrinkage or strength, you have to remember this way. So micro, macro and hybrid. Micro, macro and hybrid, it's 30, 50, 70 in volume, 30, 50, 70 in volume, and in weight percent it is 50, 70 and 85. Okay, I am again repeating. In volume it is 30, 50 and 70, and in weight percent it is 50, 70 and 85. Okay. So as the filler loading increases, there is going to be better strength, there is lesser water sorption, there is lesser polymerization shrinkage. Yes, these are the fillers content. Yeah, sorry, that's right. And the last one is hybrid is 70 to 85. That's right. So if the question has to ask you that which of these will have the highest polishability or highest luster, so it will be microfilled. Okay. We go to the next question. Microhybrid composites in water will leach out in great quantity. Microhybrid composites in water leach out in great quantity. The answer to the 14th question is silicones. Okay. See, if the question says that the most commonly used glass filler, the answer is barium. But out of all these, silicone is the one. See, silicones, boron, barium, strontium, these all are inorganic ions and they will all get leached out at variable proportions and variable intervals. But out of all these, silicone is the one which is the most soluble, and it is the one which gets maximally and the first one to get leached out from the composites. So the answer is silicone. If the question is that the maximally or the most commonly used glass filler, then it is barium. Okay. Modern dentine bonding agents are applied to the answer would be barium is the most commonly used glass fillers in composites. That is what you have to remember. Why again barium? Because barium has a refractive index that is 1.5, which is very close to your monomers. That is your bis-GMA and DEC-DMA that is present in your composite matrix. Barium has a refractive index which is very close to your resin components. That's the reason why barium is most commonly used. Okay. Modern dentine bonding agents are applied to moist dentine. Yes. Now, dentine bonding agents, I would like to discuss. There is one question that will come of dentine bonding agents in the subsequent series, which I will discuss in detail. In this modern dentine bonding agents, here they are asking about the newer generations, that is your 6th and your 7th generations, and these are the ones which mostly use your self-etching primers, okay, or they will be the single bottle system. So that is the reason why we picked up the option of moist dentine. Dry and wet dentine are generally used in the 4th generation dentine bonding agents. All of these in detail I will explain to you when the appropriate question comes, okay. For now, since the question is modern dentine bonding agents, we are actually looking at your 6th and 7th generations in which they have self-etching primers or single bottle system. So the answer is moist dentine. If you dry the dentine or if you completely desiccate the dentine, there will be your loss of your collagen network. That means your collagen network which is formed will collapse. And in that situation, your dentine bonding agents will not be able to infiltrate into the intertubular dentine and form the hybrid layer. Okay. So modern dentine bonding agents, which is your 6th and 7th generation, which in detail I will discuss to you when the appropriate question comes, that is applied on the moist dentine. I will answer everything about bonding agent. There is one question in which I will let you know about all of these numerics. Okay. But still, since you're asking me about etching time of enamel and dentine, that is 15 seconds, but in detail I will let you know. We come to the 16th question. Zinc phosphate compared to GIC has very commonly asked question. Zinc phosphate compared to GIC has a higher modulus of elasticity. Okay. Compressive strength of zinc phosphate and GIC. You should know at the tip of your tongue because it's a very commonly asked question. So you write down there. Zinc phosphate के नीचे लिखो 104 megapascal, GIC के लिए लिखो 150 megapascal. So GIC has a higher compressive strength. Then the tensile strength. The tensile strength of zinc phosphate is 5.5. The tensile strength of GIC 6.6 megapascal. So the tensile strength is also higher of GIC. 5.5. Yes, I will repeat. Compressive strength is 104 for zinc phosphate, GIC 150. 104 and 150 megapascal. Tensile strength is 5.5 for zinc phosphate, 6.6 for GIC megapascal. Modulus of elasticity is 13.6 for zinc phosphate. That means it is more rigid. Okay, zinc phosphate is more rigid. It is 13.6, whereas here it is approximately 7.2 of GIC gigapascal. So 13.6 and 7.2 gigapascal. That means GIC is more susceptible to elastic deformation, whereas zinc phosphate is more rigid. And zinc phosphate, the least film thickness out of all dental cements is that of zinc phosphate, that is 20 microns. Okay, the least film thickness of zinc is zinc phosphate, that is 20 microns. Whereas GIC film thickness is 24 microns. Okay, see these values which I have given it to you, please learn them by heart, especially when you compare zinc phosphate and GIC, because they are the two most commonly used cements. Okay, so all of these values which I have given, I hope you have written it down. So the answer for the 16th question is higher modulus of elasticity, because the rest of the other properties are lower. Film thickness of zinc phosphate is the least out of all dental cements. If your question is asked, the dental cement with the least film thickness is zinc phosphate, that is 20 microns. What is the ideal specification that is given by ADA? Does anybody know? The minimum required film thickness according to ADA specification is how much? It is 25 microns. Okay. The ADA specification for film thickness for dental cements is 25 microns. Zinc phosphate is 20 microns and GIC is 24. Zinc phosphate is 20 and GIC is 24. We go to the next question. In mechanical trituration of amalgam, what is adversely affected? I think you all should be able to now answer this question. I've already discussed about mechanical trituration or amalgamators for amalgam. So what is adversely affected? Yes, it is the working time or the setting time. This was asked in 2013 MCQ paper. So it is the working time with mechanical trituration or with amalgamation.